Hello, and welcome to another Let's Rant with Scrapperlock. This is City of Heroes on the Rebirth server. We were with Psyop, just turned level 26. I just did a video that was like an hour long. Too long, and I'm going to make it shorter. And I'm actually going to maybe cut this up into two videos. I think I might. So this will be a short video where I'm going to just do a little bit of a discussion of my lessons learned from my solo role-playing game, and then I will do a second video. I'm going to actually shoot these things back to back, which I don't normally do. I usually leave a day or two in between videos. But I want to say both of these things. So today what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you some lessons learned for solo role-playing with the Mythic Gym emulator and Savage Worlds with the Pathfinder setting. And I think most of these things are going to be sort of generically true to any role-playing game for soloing. And what I want to do is try to contribute to the genre space, or whatever you want to call it, without making you guys watch my awful videos. I'm having a lot of fun playing the game, but I don't think it's watchable, and I explained why. And it's just too much of me looking up rules and not sure how grapple works and not sure how the drop works, and it's just you don't want to watch it. But I do want to talk about some lessons learned, so I'll be pausing as I go through this and just sort of describing what I learned um, as I did my solo playthrough. However, before I do the lesson learned, I do want to talk about something really important. So when I explained in, I think it was episode 15 or 16 or 17, whichever one, where I talked, where are the fixtures? Where I talked about why I wasn't going to be posting my recordings. Um, I want to sort of expand on that a little bit and just confirm that like I made the right decision and explain why. So those of you who are thinking about possibly doing a solo game and maybe posting it to YouTube will have, again, lessons learned, benefit of my 2020 hindsight. So if we go back to my reasoning, one of the things I said was that I like to record and talk when I'm playing solo, and like I'm doing this. But I mean, I don't do that with City of Heroes when I'm not recording. I just play it silently. But when it comes to solo role playing game, I want to feel like I'm playing the game and not writing a journal. So I do notes afterwards. I record and I talk so that if I need to, and I've done this a few times, I can go back and watch specific moments so that I can make good notes. And if I know I'm recording, even though I know I'm never going to post it and I'm only recording for myself, I still record it like I'm recording for other people and explain what I'm doing. And like now I kind of talk to myself and say, well, this is for you, which is kind of silly, but it makes me feel like I'm playing the game as a game, like with other people, and not feel like I'm just sitting there looking at the screen, you know? And so I'm trying to replicate that role playing game experience without anybody else, and it helps to sort of talk to myself, and I record. But I knew, but I know each time I'm not going to post it, and this was actually very important to me today. So my character that I'm working on, I've done about 10 or 12 sessions, about 12 sessions now, having an absolute blast. I call the game, as I like to name things, even if I'm not, going to post it. I call it a paladin in the city of gloom. So what I did was it's basically going to be a city adventure, or it is a city campaign, where she is, the city is a dark fantasy. So the city is kind of a dark and kind of Gotham City-ish place. It's not, it's not a, it's not a, it's not a goody two shoes place. It's a dark place. There's a lot of evil around. There are weird evil spirits, and she already had to go to an inn and sort of exorcise an evil spirit out of it. And in the last session, she was trying to rescue a ranger from a cult, and she found the ranger, and due to some rolls, they ended up fighting a wild card enemy and 3 extras, and the ranger got put down really fast, so she was surrounded by 4 enemies, and I made a big mistake. I had given her the first strike edge on purpose because I wanted her to be able to, as a soloist, it allows you to attack somebody when they do what this guy just did and come into melee with you. You get an immediate first strike once per round, and if you get improved first strike later on as you level up, you can do it 2 or 3 times a round. And so I thought this would be really useful for if she starts getting ganked or whatever you want to call it, gang banged, surround and pound in melee. At least as the enemies come in to attack her, she'll get a blow upon them, and there's a chance she could get lucky and knock them out or whatever. And I forgot to do that. Like, even though I purposely gave her this ability to help her in this situation, I forgot she had it. Hard to do when you're managing multiple characters. In any case, she gets KO'd, and the enemies had declared capture, not kill. Right? I had actually made a roll on the fate chart. Are they fighting to capture or kill? And they were fighting to capture because they're trying to make a sacrifice with the ranger. And at first I thought, well, they'll sacrifice her too. But then I thought, well, why do they need a second sacrifice? And early in the morning this morning, I came up with an idea for why. I don't want to get into. One of the reasons I'm reshooting this is I got into too many details. But let's just suffice it to say that the reason is rather R-rated. And I'm perfectly fine with this content. But if I had been, and it led to a really cool story that led to her, she's eventually escaped now. And nothing R-rated actually happened. But if she had failed to escape, something might have. And I don't want to get in any more detail because it doesn't matter, right? But if I had been doing this for public consumption on YouTube, I would have immediately nixed that idea and said I can't do it because if she fails her rolls, we'll be getting into a type of play that I don't think I want to post on YouTube, right? It might not be the sort of thing people want to watch, and I'd have to post a warning, and it could get banned from YouTube. I don't even know. Not that it was going to be that bad, but I would have had to censor it. I would have had to think about whether I could go in that direction. I probably wouldn't have gone. I would have come up with a different story that, in my opinion, probably would have been inferior because what actually happened was amazing, leading to her, the character, after killing the cultists who were trying to do certain things to her. She was in a moving carriage going over a bridge, and she dove out of the carriage and into the river and, made it back to her cathedral. It was just epic. It was the best session I've had of the entire run so far. And it didn't turn out to be anything that would have had to be censored, but if I had failed any of those roles, it might have. And I wouldn't have even done it if it hadn't been for the fact that I knew I was never going to post it, and the only person who was going to see it was me, and so I could do whatever I want, right? And so I guess my first lesson learned for you is if your plan is to post things, right, be aware that you either have to take the chance to post things that might upset people, or else you're going to have to censor yourself. And this was what the one person, I can't remember her name, in the Ironsworn Discord was saying that convinced me, as I said in the one episode, it convinced me not to post my videos, was she said that she felt, now she was doing it like live streaming, I think to a very small audience, but she was live streaming, so that's even worse because you can't edit. And she was saying that she was constantly feeling inhibited in the roleplay. Not that, I don't know that she was trying to censor anything potentially R-rated, but just that you have to have in your mind, this is going out to the public, and you have to make sure to watch everything you say. What if you say something that could insult people? Could be considered insensitive? I don't want to have to deal with that. I'm just playing a freaking role-playing game on my computer, right? Even here, I think about how what I'm saying is going out to the public. I'm reshooting this video because I feel like I was too long and detailed and gave a bunch of information that wasn't necessary in the previous video. So I'm paying attention to what's going out. Maybe not work of art, but I'm making sure that nothing's going out that I wouldn't want watched by other people. And so you have to have that little part of your brain constantly censoring. I don't have to do that when I'm role-playing a solo game. So one lesson I have learned for you is at least make sure that you know what you're doing when you make the decision whether you want to post it or not. And if you feel like that's going to inhibit your roleplay, I suggest doing what I do and don't post it. I mean, you can shoot the video and see what it looks like later if you want. That's kind of what I could do. But try to make sure that you're aware of this fact that if you're going out to the internet, it could inhibit your roleplay and maybe lead you to not do cool stories, which is what would have happened to me. So I mean, like after when I got the idea this morning at like 5:30 in the morning when I got up to go to the bathroom, and I thought, oh, I could do this, and it might be that'd be awesome. And even if the roles get failed, it will lead to a pretty harrowing story and very dark. I mean, very dark. Okay, but it's not something I would have done if I knew anybody else was ever going to watch it. Okay, so that's one lesson learned. But now let's talk about the other lessons learned, because I don't want this video to be incredibly long. So one of the things that I'm going to talk about, some of the things I'm going to talk about are going to be for the Mythic Game Master emulator. These won't necessarily be exactly true for other systems like Ironsworn or Starforge, because they have a different mechanic in terms of how you do the Oracle. But in the Mythic Game Master emulator, they do everything as a scene. And so you're supposed to think almost like it's a movie or something in terms of scenes, and the instructions explain this. And if you're interested, you should get the instructions. They're not expensive. If you buy the PDF, it's like $8 or something from DriveThruRPG, and I can highly recommend it if you want to do something like this. You can watch Trevor Duvall's first season with Simon, and he does Mythic GME there, and you can see how it works. So everything is done in scenes. And what they tell you to do in the Mythic GM emulator, and I don't remember exactly how Trevor did this, but here's how I do it. They tell you that you're supposed to sort of describe what you think the scene is going to go like. It's sort of scene setup. And then you make a die roll to find out if the scene is going to go the way you thought. And there are 3 possibilities. It could go the way you expected. It could be interrupted by something completely unexpected. Or it could be altered in some way from what you expected. So the example would be like, we're in this mission, right? The scene is to come in and bust Mr. Static and his crew. And so what we expected to find when we came in here is Mr. Static, who's over here, and a crew, which we're going through now, and that's what we're doing. So this would be, we rolled on the Mythic GM emulator, and exactly what we thought happens. The die roll says, just proceed as normal. An altered scene would be, it's close to what you expected, but there's a difference. So we would come in here to bust Mr. Static and his crew, and we'd find when we get here that Mr. Static is not here, and somebody else is here instead. So it's kind of what we expected. We're still coming in here busting freaks, but it's altered from what we expected because Mr. Static wasn't here. And then the interrupted scene would be, we come to walk into this place, and before we get in, we hear a bank robbery going on down the street, and we realize that that's more urgent than this, and we completely turn around and go solve the bank robbery instead of doing this, right? And so that's an interrupted scene. So one thing I would say is, to facilitate this, I like to sort of have things be concrete. So what I do, and it depends on what engine you're using, or if you're using a VTT or writing it down, but I type into the terminal, scene setup, : and then I type what I expect. Katja, my character. Katja is going to wake up shackled to the altar in the company of the cultists. And then I rolled, and it said it was an altered scene. So I said, okay, she's not shackled to the altar. Maybe they're transporting her somewhere. And I put her in like a stagecoach going somewhere with a couple of the cultists. And that's how she escaped, because there were only 2 of them in there. She was shackled, and she was able to use stealth and athletics to break out of her shackles. And then she managed to fight them, and she killed them both and dove out of the stagecoach. Right? So that was an altered scene. And though an interrupted scene would be, maybe if she had been interrupted, she was captured. An interrupt scene, then you roll to see what kind of an interrupt it is. It might say PC positive, right, on the random roll. And okay, PC positive, well, she's captured right now, so maybe somebody suddenly comes looking for her and rescues her, right, which is not the scene we thought we were going to play out. And so one piece of advice I have is write it out. Like, commit to the scene in some way. I like to write it out so that you have it there, and then when the result comes through and it says altered, you already know what you committed to alter it. And so that's one piece of advice I have. My second piece of advice is to make sure you're very clear on what your scenes are and when they start and when they end. Right? This whole mission, I would say, is a scene. And at the end of each scene, and so at the start of each scene, you're rolling to see if it gets interrupted or altered. But at the end of each scene, you then, as a game master, and you have to put your GM hat on and determine whether you feel like the PC was in control of the scene or whether the NPCs were, the enemies were. So even though my character managed to win a battle and to escape from the stagecoach, she was not in control. She was a prisoner. She was put into the stagecoach. She was driven through town. She had to fight these enemies, and she was on a bridge and had to dive out of the stagecoach into the river. That is not someone who's in control of the scene. When you're not in control of the scene, the chaos factor goes up. And the chaos factor increases the probability that random crap is going to happen, and also is supposed to make it harder on your character. Okay, and so in other words, it makes it more likely that random rolls theoretically will go against you if you use the engine correctly. And you got to read the instructions and make sure you understand what you're doing in order for that to work. The whole idea is the more out of control the character is, the more likely that random crap is going to happen and that random crap is going to go against you. So be clear on what your scenes are. And now to explain how things can go against you, with the Mythic GM emulator, the mechanic, the way it works, is as the chaos rank goes up, the probability of a yes answer goes up. So with a chaos rank 5, which is sort of the default between 1 and 9, and I'm unsure something's going to happen, is a 50% chance of a yes and a 50% chance of a no. But if the chaos rank goes up to 9, unsure is like an 80% chance of a yes. So because that's true, you have to be careful how you word questions, or if you ask, is something good going to happen to me now with a really high chaos rank, it's almost certain that it will, and now everything's going in favor of your character. So the way I do this, and they don't necessarily tell you that this is what you have to do in the rule book, but this is how I do it to make sure that the chaos factor going up is going against the character, and the chaos factor going down is going in favor of the character. I always ask a question in such a way that yes will be bad for the character unless it's a neutral question, right? If it's a neutral question, I tend to force the chaos rank. You can do this in Foundry to be 5 and just do a 50-50 unsure. If it's just something completely neutral. But if it's something that can go against the character, I always ask so that the yes is bad for her, right? Is this character going to get mobbed by the freak show? A yes answer would get her mobbed and would be bad for her. Is this place safe? You don't want to do that at a chaos rank 9 because it's almost certainly going to be safe, and at a chaos rank 9 most places should be dangerous because you're way out of control, right? So that's my next piece of advice, is make sure that you word your questions, your yes-no questions for the fate chart, carefully so that a yes is bad for the character if it's possible for the answer to be bad. Now sometimes the answer may not be good or bad for the character, and then it's just an answer. But if it's an answer where one of the ways could hurt the character, make it so that a yes answer is bad for you. Therefore, as the chaos rank goes up, bad stuff is more likely to happen, and as the chaos rank goes down, bad stuff is less likely to happen because your character is more in control. And I feel like that fits the spirit of how Mythic GM Emulator is supposed to work. So that's how I do it. The next point is, if you want to know if something interesting might happen to the character, like finding a secret door, or are they able to persuade somebody of something, right? Can they convince somebody of something? There are two ways to do this. Well, I guess there are multiple. There are two main ways to do it. The first way is to ask the fate chart, is this character persuadable, right? Or is this character going to listen to reason? Yes, no, and I'm unsure, or it's very likely, or it's a near sure thing, or it's almost impossible, right? That's one way to do it. Is there a secret door on this wall? Ask the fate chart. Then you place it there, right? And then the character's going to have to make a notice check if it's Savage Worlds, or perception check if it's D&D, to find the door. Now this gets into some trouble because, well, just because you as a GM know the door is there, the character doesn't, so why are they going to search that wall? So then you could get into something like the book DM Yourself, which suggests that you have like 3 or 4 known gaming strategies of the character, like the character always searches walls for secret doors or never does. I don't think that's necessary, but it can be difficult to adjudicate if you know that there's a secret door because of the fate chart, but the character has no particular reason to search this wall. To me, that's unsatisfying. The second way to do this, and this is the way I prefer, is instead of asking the fate chart whether there's a secret door there, roll the notice check. Instead of asking the fate chart if the person you're talking to might be willing to listen to reason, roll the persuade check, right? And then base your answer on the check. So, oops, I hit the wrong button. I was supposed to hit confuse for him. Oh well. So, for example, if you're doing notice and you're checking a wall, right? You might say, all right, the notice check was a success. So that means, it doesn't necessarily mean there's a secret door on the wall, but it means if you searched the room and you got a success on the notice check, you noticed something. Now, if it's just a simple success in Savage Worlds, then I would say you noticed something, might be interesting, might be relevant, right? Then you might ask the fate chart, is this a relevant clue, or is it just something of a curiosity, right? Or you roll on a random table to see what's in the room that could be interesting, and you book of random tables or something like that. I would say if you get a success with a raise, I interpret that as, okay, we got a good clue, right? Something really useful, not just a random thing. This clue might be related to one of our quests, and if it's a success with a raise, it might be related to the one we're looking for right now. And then you would roll on the fate chart or on action and theme from Ironsworn, or on a random number table from somewhere else, like the Ultimate Toolbox or the Adventure Designer, or one of these other books of random tables, to figure out what is it that you found that was useful, right? And I feel like to me, that's better because it lets you use your skills, right? Which is what you're going to want to do if you're playing with a role-playing game like Savage Worlds or Champions or something that has skills. And so that's kind of my next piece of advice is, when possible, if it's something that could be a skill check, make the skill check first. If you fail it, nothing happened. If you crit fail it, something bad happens, right? If it's Savage Worlds. And if you succeed, you find something, but it might be not great, just not irrelevant or not related to this quest. And then if you succeed with a raise, you find something that is relevant to this quest. And I feel like that allows the character's abilities to sort of determine stuff rather than the random number table. And then if you do get a success with a raise, then you know, okay, I've got to put something interesting in here, and then you roll for it on the fate chart or on the oracles to find out what that is. And I've had a lot of success doing that, and I found that to be a pretty useful way to engage both the oracles in the fate chart and my character's skills. And I find that a very satisfying way to do it. So that was my next piece of advice. Let me look at the next one here. One thing I will say, because I've tried them both, I was going to be, the smart aleck and go, I'm going to do a party. Yeah, I highly recommend against doing parties. One character is enough. I wouldn't even use a sidekick. Sidekicks are helpful because they can soak, right? They can, and I don't mean soaking wounds, but they can absorb some of the negative consequences when you fail a roll. But what I found is, if there are more than 3 or 4 characters in a scene, and they're player characters, it's just, way too hard. NPCs aren't so bad because they don't have as many abilities as PCs, and they're not as complicated. Although it's not as different in Savage Worlds as D&D, it's especially different in Dungeons & Dragons. You don't want to run multiple PCs. I just think it's way too hard. The DM Yourself book recommends a PC and a sidekick, and I think I would get no more complicated than that. I recommend one PC. It's just too hard to track everything. Now, if we're going back to Savage Worlds, right? Single PC. There is a Savage Worlds supplement for solo gaming. I can't remember who wrote it. It's on DriveThruRPG, so you can find it. It's not expensive. It's short. It's pretty good. I don't use most of it, but one of the things he suggests is doing 15 skill points instead of 12, just to give yourself enough coverage of different possible skills, like healing and stuff, so that you can, you don't just become unable to succeed at everything you do because there are too many skills that you don't cover. Right? The assumption in a game like D&D or Savage Worlds is that most skills will be covered because they're going to be a party and there are several of you. But if you're all by yourself, that's not true. So go ahead and be lenient on yourself and give yourself the extra 3 skill points. It's not cheating, right? You're conceding the reality that your character by itself cannot do what a party can do. You can't. So somehow or other, you're going to have to, quote unquote, cheat or game the system in some way to make it possible for a solo character to survive in a group setting. So if you want to do something like play Rise of the Rune Lords or something, I don't recommend a party. I recommend doing some things to buff your character and then just weakening maybe the number of enemies that you fight or something like that. I would say in that same vein, don't feel guilty about being slightly gamey with your choices of abilities like edges in Savage Worlds, right? Because um, so, like, for example, I gave my character, although there's no particular reason why she should have this, the edge Elan. Elan gives you a +2 bonus to every time you use a Benny to do a reroll. I think that's really important when you're solo, because you might be like trying to soak wounds or something like that, and if you don't soak the wounds, you just die. There's nobody there to heal you, to stand over your body and fight the enemies. You go down and you go down fast. And I saw this happen with my paladin 2 sessions ago. Like her dwarf colleague went down in the first hit of the first round. He just got crushed by the boss monster guy, the evil cultist, and then she got surrounded and pounded. And because I forgot the first strike edge, which is another great edge that I gave her primarily for solo purposes, because I forgot I had it. I didn't even get to use that advantage. So don't be afraid to use gamey things like luck, which gives you more bennies. Again, for Savage Worlds, and speaking of bennies, I've gone with 1 hour sessions. Sometimes I've played 1 hour sessions back to back, but when my recording gets to about an hour, I don't count all the pauses when I'm looking up rules, but when my recording gets to about an hour of actual play, I stop. Now that's way shorter than the normal sessions, or normal sessions are 3 to 4 hours. But remember, in a normal session, you've got 4 characters, they've each got 3 bennies. So in a 4-hour session, there are 12 bennies to be spent, which means there are about 3 bennies an hour. If your character's by itself and you have 3 bennies, after an hour, you've done your 3 bennies in an hour, right? So at that point, you're going to be out of bennies. Like, a single fight will take out all your bennies because you're going to soak wounds and unshake and stuff like that. And so, again, this is Savage World specific, but I highly recommend 1 hour sessions and then refresh your bennies. And if you watch Trevor Duvall, most of his sessions, I don't know how long he played, but the edited videos are 30 to 50 minutes. And he refreshes Simon's bennies each session. So I strongly recommend that as well. So this way you have enough bennies to actually do something. And again, it's weird to do things like this because it sort of feels like cheating. I'm giving myself way more bennies than you're quote unquote supposed to have. But remember that the benny system is based on the assumption that you're going to have 3 to 5 players at the table and they will get enough bennies. So so I definitely recommend refreshing those bennies. And I also suggest, in addition to that, give yourself bennies for things that you do in game. The GM is supposed to do this in Savage Worlds. They highly recommend it. They tell you to be very sort of free and liberal with the bennies because if you give them to the players more, then the players will use them more, right? And they give you things like, well, if they achieve something or whatever, good role play, etc. Really hard to do by yourself. I'm going to decide I gave good role play. It's silly. So instead, I made a series of, I've got like house rules of how I do this. If you win a fight against extras in my game, if I win a fight against extras, I get a benny. If I succeed at a dramatic task opposed by extras or just a generic dramatic task or a social conflict against extras, I get a benny. If I succeed against a boss, if I beat a boss monster, I get a conviction token. Conviction's great because it lasts a long time. So when my character went down and was defeated, I gave her a conviction because that's what you're supposed to do. So when she woke up, in addition to her 3 bennies, she had a conviction token, and man, she used that thing. She used that thing to kill the wildcard cultist. He had 3 wounds, and she just about was able to. She had shook him, and she was like 2 points away from wounding him and taking him out. I think it was something like that. And I was like, well, unless I roll a 1 with the conviction, she's going to do it. And she aced her conviction. So she ended up doing like 12 more damage to him. And he was out. She crushed him. Okay. Just basically stabbed his own dagger into his heart and killed him. She took it away during the battle and so on. So my point here is that you can... you need to find a way to give yourself those rewards of bennies and conviction because as a GM, you would be awarding players that. So I don't like doing it on the fly. I like writing out for myself a set of rules that here are the rules I follow. And when those rules are triggered, I give myself a benny. I give myself a conviction token. So that's another lesson I learned from doing this. In terms of NPC decisions in combat, I would recommend finding some kind of an AI mechanic. Ironsworn has combat actions, and Ironsworn Delve has combat method and target, and I think Starforged has the same. There's also a FlexTail Flex AI system, which is this huge book. I'm just using the basic system, which is like the first 5 pages of it. But there's a really complicated, like, you figure out what kind of an enemy is. It a brute? Is it a controller? Is it a stalker? Is it a scrapper? Right? They don't use those names, but they're similar. And then, is this character at advantage? Like, are they outnumbering the enemy? Are they outnumbered by the enemy? Are they cornered? Are they at half hit points? And then, are they bloodied? Whatever. And then, based on that, you roll in the chart. Tells you what it's going to do. Now that's probably overly complicated most of the time, and I think you may as well just use combat action or combat method and target. But you can get really cool about it. My point is, have something. Don't always just you decide what both sides are doing. Roll the dice, and the roll. I mean, sometimes it's just sort of obvious. But if you roll the dice, sometimes the bad guy will do something surprising. Like, for instance, with the cultists, the guy ordered them to capture my character, so I then judged that attack main was going to be grappling and attack secondary was going to be a dagger, right? Because they had been ordered to capture, and attack main is more likely to happen in Flex AI than attacking secondary. It's the most common thing to do. So their most common attack should be to grapple because they were told to capture. Right? So that kind of thing can help you frame the combat. I also would say for Savage Worlds, decide ahead of time how you're going to advance. Mine is every time I complete a mystic thread, a mythic thread, you get an advance. So we had a thread of escape the capture of the cultists. So after she dove into the water and got out onto the riverbank and wrapped her cloak around herself to dry off, Katja had escaped. My character had escaped the cultists, and that closed the thread because they were dead. Like, the two cultists were dead and being taken off by the stagecoach. The driver didn't even realize they were dead. And so that finishes that thread. She's not captured anymore, so I gave her an advance. So third advance. So that so decide ahead of time how you're going to do that. It might be after every session, but figure out ahead of time and then follow that. The other thing I would say is watch the number of enemies. Even a few weak extras can crush your character. 1 to 3 enemies is enough. You plus 1 to 3 other characters is enough in the scene for you to manage as the GM and player. So be very careful. Don't have more than 5 tokens on the board, right? The PC, maybe an extra that's helping the PC, and 3 NPCs. If an extra is helping the PC, then you can have the NPC be wild card or something like that. But don't overdo it. Because even though it seems like your character should be able to handle this, because you're alone, it's really easy to get surrounded. And once you're surrounded, they get gang up bonus, and then they're doing +2 and +3 every time they roll to hit you. And it's super easy to get a success with a raise and just acing on damage, and just you're dead. And it's really no fun to go from we're in battle to dead, and then your campaign is over. What's the fun in that? I mean, you don't want to cheat, right? You don't want to make it too easy. You don't want to win unfairly. But one of the things Ironsworn has taught me is don't penalize yourself too much. Sean Tompkins says in the Starforged book, don't hit yourself, right? That is punching yourself as a player to beat yourself up for failures of your character. Let the failures advance the story in some unconventional way rather than stopping it cold, right? The way Ironsworn works, you never stop the story. If you succeed, there's always an additional something, a weak hit. Yes, but. And the but moves the story. And even a failure, like paying the price, there is something that happens to move the story along. So I would say watch the number of enemies and try not to be too punitive to yourself. Don't overdo your world. I started out trying to make this big giant hex crawl world. That was probably too much. I just ended up with a city. I went onto the Watabu, or however it's called, city generator, and I just generated a city map. I ignored all of their district names, made up my own district. I just took the district colors that they had. I imported the map into Foundry, and then made little areas just called district. I didn't know what the names were, and then as I've entered the different districts or had reason to talk about them, I've come up with the Poplar Heights and Thundertown and Arali Village and the Jarosite Quarter and all these cool sounding districts that are just sort of generically made up. So don't overdo it. One city has been enough for me so far, and I've done 12 sessions. Keep your adventures short. Short maps, small maps if you have maps. Try to keep the point of the adventures pretty succinct. Don't try to do massive dungeon crawls. You kind of can't with a solo character because as soon as they take a wound or two, they have to stop for 10 days and rest in Savage Worlds. And even in D&D, how are you going to take a long rest by yourself in a dungeon? You're just going to get swarmed by wandering monsters, right? So you've got to pare it down and try to focus on the story rather than a big giant hex crawl. And then finally, don't be too strict with things like starting gold. For instance, my PC didn't have enough gold to buy a full set of armor plus weapons plus a shield and an adventuring kit. She would have been minus the adventuring kit. Now, she's in a city. She didn't absolutely have to have one. But I just thought, she's solo. Let's give her the kit. So I gave her 50 gold pieces more than you're supposed to start with in Pathfinder for Savage Worlds. So, there's nobody else in the party that can bring anything to the table. It's reasonable to be forgiving on yourself so that you can have a reasonable experience. You don't want to be frustrated, guys. And that's the most important thing. If you ended up with no gear, so you don't have torches, you don't have water skins, you don't have rations, and your character can't go into a dungeon that's the next part of the story because you have no supplies and no gold, how is that fun? Yeah, it might be realistic. It might follow the rules technically, but it's just stopping yourself from playing. So now you have to have your character go take these stupid little quests, catching rats in an inn, to gain copper pieces so that you can go buy torches. When you really want to do is go into the cultist dungeon and rescue the ranger. Let's go rescue the ranger. Do what's fun, right? And there's several people have talked about this. You're soloing. There's nobody to argue with but you. So if it's fun, do it. And that's my advice. So those are my lessons learned, and hopefully those will be useful to people. And since you can't watch, this is way longer than I wanted this video. I wanted it to be 15 minutes. But hopefully that was really helpful stuff. I really hope so. And what I would say is the most important thing is that you're enjoying the game. And if you have to change the rules to enjoy the game, you're not cheating. There is no such thing as cheating in a role-playing game if the GM gives permission. And when you're playing, you're also the GM. Right? So if the GM says it's okay to do, and you're the GM, it's okay to do. House rule whatever you want. And that's my last bit of advice. Hopefully that was useful and helpful to you. Since you can't watch my actual plays, I can give you my lessons learned, and hopefully that's really useful to people. And until next time, I am Scrapperlock, and this has been Let's Rant in City of Heroes on the Rebirth server.